In my Exhibit D series, we discussed moonrocks, lunar laser retroreflectors, and radio telecommunications. These are three aspects that propagandists have used to prop up their case for Apollo. Admittedly, there were some errors that were made in my section regarding telecommunications. One of them was my statement that ham radio operators could not possibly have received Apollo's communications because they don't use 2 GHz. This information stemmed from this site, which listed the ham radio bands. After the series was released, certain viewers pointed me in the direction of various hams who claimed to have tracked Apollo when it was on or near the moon. This is not exactly the all the way to the moon and back tracking that propagandists such as Shane Killian have frequently claimed these individuals did, and is certainly nothing that can't be pulled off with an unmanned craft either to relay signals from low orbit or transmit pre-recorded information. I also learned that the FCC polices what received data these hams can and cannot release to the public. Important: FCC regulations prohibit the disclosure of content of communications not intended for the public. Thus, it is illegal to inform the press or any other third party of the content of any information directly received from the Apollo communications link. This and other information was brought forth in many of my subsequent videos, including Apollo Ham Sandwich and Australia and the Conspirators, the latter of which Phil Webb responded to. But Phil Webb ignored this so he could attack my original mistake. I expected him to point to the various ham operators as others had. Instead, he goes on to say that it was not exactly 2 GHz that Apollo used, but 2.3 GHz. He also claims that the ham radio bands I showed are for transmitting on, not receiving. Even if true, he ignores the corrections I made regarding the radio hams, and the fact that FCC enforces restrictions on what telecommunications the hams can and cannot release to the public. In addition, Webb makes many libelous accusations. Among them is his claim that Bill Casing made up the various individuals he spoke to.
As with all the other unnamed experts that Casing quotes in his conspiracist Bible, this expert obviously didn't know anything about his area of expertise. Casing's fabricated experts are called proof surrogates, and using them to support his claims is called the false attribution fallacy, which Casing apparently used extensively throughout his book.
The unnamed individuals that Casing mentioned are not fabricated proof surrogates, as Webb alleges. I know they are factual people because among the collection of Bill Casing's papers and letters that I have access to, many of the people in question are listed by name. Casing probably kept these individuals anonymous in his book for protection purposes, not uncommon when trials and/or investigations are underway. Webb had previously misrepresented my use of Brainig and Winderley's statements that MCC controllers can be fooled by simulated data. He twisted my use of these quotations to imply that I said Tetra was used to fool the manned spaceflight network. I sent Webb an email demanding that he retract these false accusations against myself, Bill Casing, and others, and he has refused to do so. He later released a video discussing the Soviets and Jodrell Bank. The Lovell telescope at Jodrell Bank is the dish that was used to track the Soviet lunar probes of 1959 through to 1976. Knowing that the Russians relied on this telescope to track their lunar probes, we contacted Jodrell Bank to ask whether or not this dish was used to track Apollo. Ian Morrison responded to our message. One did not need the Lovell telescope to track the Apollo craft as their signals were very strong. We used a 50-foot antenna to track all of them. However, this 50-foot dish only picked up frequencies of 2,300 megahertz, not 2 gigahertz as the Apollo spacecraft had used.
Here, Ian Morrison confirms that Jodrell Bank used their 50-footer to track or follow Apollo 11 when it was near the moon, which incidentally left their Mark I free to simultaneously track Luna 15. and we've already shown that the downlinks from the Apollo spacecraft were transmitted in the 2300 MHz range, just as Ian remembered. Furthermore, the Soviets did not rely on Jodrell Bank to track their satellites. This false premise is the beginning of yet another strawman fallacy. During the Cold War, the Soviets had a reputation for being extremely secretive and deceitful, so any announcements of great achievements were often met with equally great skepticism by America and the rest of the world. Such was the fate of Luna 1. Many people did not believe, or did not want to believe, that Luna 1 actually existed, let alone that she made it to the moon. No one wanted to think that the Soviets had the capability to do that. So, for a short while, beginning with Luna 2, the Soviets began sending Jodrell Bank the pointing data to track their lunar probes that were destined to crash into the moon, so that Jodrell Bank could provide independent verification that the Soviets did have the technology they claimed to have. The Soviets did not require or depend on the services of Jodrell Bank.
Yes, they did. In my Exhibit D series, I explicitly played a clip from the BBC documentary series The Planets. In that series, we are told that the Russians had no means of tracking Luna all the way to the moon, and came crying to Jodrell Bank for help.
It began with Lunik 2. The Soviets had mustered all their technical know-how to build the probe. But to score the propaganda coup of reaching the moon first, there was one thing they lacked. They had no means of tracking Lunik all the way. No way to prove they'd really got there. This was the challenge that faced one of Lunik's chief engineers, Boris Chertok.
Надо было найти способ, как заставить все человеческое общество поверить в то, что мы действительно попали на Луну. И вот тогда вдруг сообразили, что есть в Англии обсерватория в Jodrell Bank. У него были хорошие остро направленные антенны, пожалуй, лучшие в мир.
The Soviets sent a covert message to Jodrell Bank near Manchester, the only place in the world which could track a probe so far away in space. Its director was Bernard Lovell.
To my astonishment, I found on the telex machine the long message from Moscow giving complete details, not only the transmission frequencies of this Lunik, but also its position, calculated for the latitude and longitude of Jodrell Bank. And this, of course, was a clear indication that we were meant to do something about it. So we sprang into action.
Когда мы точно сообщили время старта и координаты, по которым идет волна, вот этот лунник, он действительно засек и следил за полетом нашего лунника к Луне.
We immediately found the bleep bleep of the Lunik in exactly the position the Russians stated, and this indicated that the Lunik was destined for the moon. The impact was, I recall, I think 2 minutes 23 seconds past 10 o'clock when Lunik hit the moon and the signals suddenly ceased. There was, of course, an uproar from the press because it was realized that the Russians had achieved a remarkable degree of technological expertise in doing this.
The Lovell telescope at Jodrell Bank is the dish that was used to track the Soviet lunar probes of 1959 through to 1976. And you know the rest. Webb pulls this tactic often throughout his entire critique series. Ignoring the source material for any given topic, plays only my paraphrasing of what the source material said, denies it, and then tries to pin what the source material said on me. This is one of many omissions and straw man arguments that Webb creates in his series. Bottom line is, the Soviets relied on Jodrell Bank to track their own lunar probes, and according to Bob Pritchard, The 2300 MHz 50-footer used to allegedly receive signals from Apollo, much like the ham operators, only received these signals when the craft was on or near the moon.